now my mind is blown. No surprise, guess I should have known. Oh, my mind, now my mind is blown. No surprise, guess I should have known. You got control of me, break my barricades. Walls are crumbling, grounds they shake. You came to save, but it's way too late. Every single time you stay, I cave.
To another episode of Neurodivergent News Live, where we are redefining what it means to be neurodivergent and helping you find the tools necessary to quote and unquote live in a neurotypical world. Today we have an absolutely amazing topic. We are going to be talking about Self-Advocacy 101 and what that means. Now today is an even more extra special episode because today I get to pick the mind, the brain of the great and wonderful Jeremy Brakefield. This is a special episode because it is just me and him. So Jeremy, please take a minute and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then let's just dive right into the meat of this.
Yes, I am Jeremy Brakefield, the secondary co-host of this fine show, and father to 7 neurodivergent kids, and all-around business person.
All-around business person, I love it. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about self-advocacy. Now, normally, obviously, there are extra voices that are on the air with us today. Unfortunately, things have come up, and so we will not have the amazing Stone with us tonight, nor do we have our special guests that we lined up. But like I said, I'm going to get to pick Jeremy's brain, and I think this is going to be absolutely amazing. So let's start with, what is self-advocacy? Now, before I throw out a clinical definition, Jeremy, I'd love to hear your take on this.
For me, self-advocacy is essentially having enough understanding of what you need to make those boundaries and stick to them. To be able to tell people that this is where I'm comfortable, this is where you're going to stop. And for a lot of us that are neurodivergent, this is really important because for a lot of us, we think that there's something wrong with saying, hey, don't cross this line. Hey, you're being too loud. You're being too close. Just whatever it is that essentially overstimulates you, whatever it is that pushes those buttons that makes you uncomfortable, having enough understanding that there's nothing wrong with telling somebody, hey, here's where my boundaries are, I need you to respect that. And for a lot of us, that's hard to do, because we feel like we're asking too much when we do that, because nobody else does. Nobody else has to talk about these things. Nobody else has to say, hey, here's where my whatever is. Well, awesome for them. We do. And there's nothing wrong with us saying, hey, here's where I'm comfortable. This is where I can accept your input, your feedback into my life, and actually just keep it where it needs to be. But for a lot of us, that's really hard to do. We feel like we don't deserve that. We don't understand that is reasonable.
Okay, so before we get into the philosophical side of it and really start digging into the meat of this, the clinical definition of self-advocacy, and I think Jeremy put it beautifully because none of what I'm about to say disagrees with anything he said, is the ability to speak up for yourself and assert your own needs, rights, and interests. It involves effectively communicating your thoughts and feelings, negotiating for what you want, and making informed decisions. And then it further stipulates this can occur in a variety of places such as work, school, or personal relationships, and isn't always verbal. And I think that's an interesting take on it, especially considering we're talking to the neurodivergent community, where so many of us struggle with effective communication.
Yeah, I mean, there's for a lot of us, I think it's the positioning of statements. And what I mean by that is that whenever you say something, there's a way it can be taken. And there's a lot of times where even with neurotypicals, a husband and wife will be talking about something, have a miscommunication, and now they're in a fight. But even with neurotypicals, they're generally talking about things from the same kind of standpoint. Not like with autistics, where it's you have an objective standpoint. So when I say to you specific words, I'm meaning the definition of those words. I'm not really talking in slang. I'm not trying to have you use an innuendo. For a lot of time with autistics, we say something very blunt that someone takes as innuendo or takes as slang, and that's where the problem starts to come in. Because that breakdown in communication.
Okay, so what the audience is not aware of is probably 15 minutes before this broadcast, my husband and I were having a technical conversation about broadcasting this show. And we literally had a moment where I said, you gotta click on the doohickey and rotate it, the thing right there below the thing over yonder. The look he gave me. Verbal communication is not always effective. So, from your perspective, how do we advocate for ourselves? I mean, why does it matter that we advocate for ourselves?
Because at the end of the day, if we don't advocate for ourselves, who's gonna? I mean, really and truly. If I don't tell people that, hey, a whole lot of noise, 3 or 4 people all standing over me talking at the exact same time, basically shuts down my audio centers. Like, I stop hearing the conversation because there's just so much information coming in. And so, if I don't tell people, hey, I'm getting overstimulated, like somebody needs to back off, we need to drop the decibels in here if y'all want me to actually participate in this conversation. If I don't make that statement, they don't know, and they're completely confused as to why I'm screaming at everybody to shut up and get away from me. And that's important, because if you're overstimulated and you just sit there in it, you're gonna blow up, because the communication is gonna come out one way or another.
No, I mean, I completely agree, and I'm looking at this from a slightly different perspective, because one of the things that Stone loves to talk about on the show is internalized ableism, and since he's not here, I have to throw his viewpoint in just a little bit and hope I don't step on his toes. But if we're not self-advocating, the things that we need are not being normalized. And I think that's one of the things that we've been talking about a lot on this show is understanding that if we do not advocate for ourselves, we are going to cause the scenes that cause all the negative feedback and cause all the negative mental loops. But it goes a step further than that, because when we self-advocate, especially those of us that are parents, we're setting a model for the kids that are coming up underneath us and showing them that they don't have to suffer in silence and in the shadows and in the corners like we did and like the undiagnosed generation before us did.
Yeah. Sorry, I was looking at my notes.
No, you're fine.
But yeah, it's for a lot of us, it's that stigma of, if I ask for accommodation, if I try to let people know this about me, that I'm being difficult, that I'm just trying to cause problems, I'm trying to be special or whatever. And the thing is that's not the case. It's literally no different than somebody with any other handicap. I don't want to say disability, because disability is the wrong term. It's just there are certain aspects that we don't have as much natural skill as other people. But there's other aspects where we have more skill. So I don't like the term disabled. I prefer handicap, because that's a little bit different. It's the difference, for me, it's the difference between most people can walk. Some people, when they walk, they feel like they're dragging extra weight. That's their handicap. Whether it be they have a musculature issue with their leg or whatever, there's something that's hindering them. But it's not necessarily a disability. It's just they have something different that they have to figure out about their life to continue to move forward. But at the end of the day, everybody is that way, whether you're neurotypical or neurodivergent. Everyone has to figure out this life and how they're going to get along in it.
Well, no, you're not wrong. I mean, you mentioned this a minute ago, and it's a common myth about when we stand up for ourselves that if we ask for what we need, we're being difficult. We're not making things easy. But the reality is, by not asking for what we need, we're setting ourselves up to be difficult because we are going to melt down. We are going to eventually cause a scene if we get overstimulated. But if we had set those groundworks, those boundaries ahead of time, then we never reach the point where we have to become difficult in order to protect ourselves.
Right. And I think those of us that are on the spectrum of some sort, we just have to understand that it's not about being difficult. It's not about pushing. It's about informing. Give them the information of, hey, this is what I need. If they want to step up and help you, okay, awesome. If they don't, they have that information that they can make that decision. Just like my big push for most of us neurodivergents is we need to understand how neurotypicals think, how they live, how the baseline, so that we can decide, okay, is that something we want to actually take part in, or is that something that we think is not necessary and we don't even want to have a part of it? For me, it's all about informing.
I agree, because what we're touching on here is whose responsibility is it to create harmony? Is it our responsibility to lay out our boundaries and expect them to follow and quote and unquote the rules? Is it their responsibility to take that extra step to make sure that miscommunications aren't occurring? And my answer would be yes. It is both parties' responsibility. So that's where we come to this line of when are we being difficult and when are we just standing up for ourselves?
And I think that's just something that we have to discuss, that it's a case-by-case basis, and you have to just try to be as objective as possible. Think about it, and is this something that's necessary? But at the same time, if it is necessary for you, you have to come to that realization. You have to decide, this is important enough for me that this needs to be information that is given out.
Well, and I think that's the point right there, is that when you're confronting somebody, you are essentially telling them that you have a problem and expecting them to come to the solution. Why don't you listen to what I say? You're making it harder for me. You're pointing out the problem and then expecting them to provide that solution for you. Versus self-advocacy, you're saying, hey, I have a problem. I already know the solution. Can you agree to the terms for my solution?
Right.
And I think that's something that's very important, because it's all... A lot of times when, for me personally anyway, when I feel like my boundaries have been crossed, I absolutely do become combative. My poor husband has seen it more times than he would probably care to admit, and so have a few of my children in stressful situations. But the difference is, after that initial outburst, you have to stop feeling and start thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Because combativeness is aggressiveness. That's a feeling. And then you act on that feeling. Versus recognizing that you had a feeling because the boundary was crossed and then figuring out what to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
Sir?
Nothing.
Okay. No. Anyway.
Keep going.
But that's the thing. We have to recognize that everybody handles situations differently. Even amongst the neurotypical community, Jeremy and I had this hypothetical in one of the strange conversations that occur between the two of us at one point about you tell a group of people that somebody has died. You're going to get 10 different reactions in that room. Technically, every single one of those emotional reactions is a valid reaction, but it's based entirely on their personal experiences and perceptions. The problem is what happens after that reaction. Do you let the feeling tell you what to do, or do you decide what to do with the feeling?
For me, it's like I've explained to you before. For me, I don't know if it's because I'm objective or what, but for me, the emotional response is all based on the information that's given. But what if the information given is inaccurate? So like you just said, there's a room full of people that are told this person has died. All of them have a different feeling. Well, what if the person they're told that died is not actually dead? What, at that point, all those emotions that they have felt, what would you classify those emotions as? Would you classify those emotions as valid? Because that's something that's, for me, that's kind of where I draw the line, is that emotions born of an untruth or emotions born of an inaccuracy, that emotion is inaccurate just like the previous information, or that emotion is untrue just like the information that triggers it.
I think that you and I are saying pretty much the same thing. We just haven't agreed on a common lexicon yet for this particular analogy. But that does bring us to, what are some of the small and manageable things that some people can, or like little things that people can do to advocate for themselves? And I think the very first thing that we need to acknowledge is, when you feel uncomfortable, you have to live in that. You have to recognize it, because there's something that is making you uncomfortable. And until you accept that, you can't figure out what the thing is and try to change it.
Yeah. I prefer the term understand what it is, but yeah.
Well, I'm trying to keep it simple, and you know I oversimplify things sometimes to my own detriment.
Because for me, understanding and accepting are two different things.
That's a valid point. So, I mean, but that's a hard place to be in.
Because for me, it's okay, I understand I have communication issues. I do not accept that I have communication issues. And for me, that's the difference. If I accept it, then that means it is what it is. I can't communicate, so I may as well just stop talking to people. I don't accept that. I understand that I have those communication issues, so I have to try harder to try and learn those communication points to be able to accept that I do have communication ability. Does that make sense, or was that just a whole bunch of crazy?
Even if it was a whole bunch of crazy, I'm sure that a good chunk of our listeners probably understood exactly how you felt as you were describing that.
Well, at least that's something.
I mean, but legitimately, once you get to that place where you know what is making you uncomfortable, and then you put a name to it, once you know what it is, then you can begin to create the language or formulate the language you need to express that discomfort. Once you've figured out the language that you need to use and you've expressed it, that's where it actually gets hard. And I know for a lot of us with communication issues, that first step feels like the hardest step, but we also all have fear of rejection. And I say all, that is an extreme generalization. There's obviously a percentage of us that have moved past that, but typically most humans have a fear of rejection by the people that they love, or that they respect, or that they're underneath in the hierarchy. So once you've expressed your discomfort and you've posited a solution to how to make that go away, and they tell you no, that's irrelevant, that's not important, why would we spend time or energy just to make you comfortable?
Mm-hmm.
That's a painful place.
And that's where a lot of our people are at.
And that's where most people stop advocating.
Yep. Because for a lot of us, we may say something to somebody, and then if they just shrug it off or flat don't listen, then eventually it gets to the point where we just don't want to continue anymore. We stop trying. We walk away from the conversation. But the problem is that when we do that and we walk away from the conversation, the next person like us that comes up, now they have to deal with the exact same thing we did. And it's not right. It's not moving forward. It's not learning. It's not, yeah.
Well, that's a lot of why we have these conversations, is because for many of us, constantly answering those questions about why do you need to have this accommodation? Are you sure you're not overreacting? It's not a big deal. Other people don't manage things this way. We pass that on when we let them get away with it. But constantly explaining ourselves over and over causes burnout. We don't want to deal with it, and then we end up melting down. And so we justify not fighting back for ourselves because we say it's less mentally draining.
Yeah, which is really, it's sad. Because the thing is that it's true. Because in a lot of cases, it is absolutely easier to stop and just stop trying to push and just deal with it than to try to push through it. But at the same time, that's easier for you. That's not easier for everybody else. Everybody behind you that has those same problems, that you're sitting there going, well, I'm not going to bother with it because it's too much effort, it's too much energy, it's not worth it. And the problem is you're spending all your spoons on this, and so is everybody else behind you. So at the end of the day, what is actually the cost on keeping your mouth shut?
I mean, essentially we're robbing future generations of the genius that is coming behind us because they're not going to advocate for themselves, and they're going to hide that genius to fit in. I mean, how many people do I know in Gen X and millennials that are completely and utterly detached from the reality around them, but had the gifts to change the world? Because advocating for what they needed and what they wanted, they got rejected and shut down so much they became numb.
Mm-hmm. But that's one of the big things for our people is the burnout aspect. Mm-hmm. Because to go back to the spoon metaphor, we keep having to shell out so many spoons that after so many days of running out of spoons, you get burnt out and you just don't care. But we have to keep from allowing that to be our norm. We have to keep trying to push to having extra spoons at the end of the day.
I don't disagree with any of that. My concern with it, though, is that when we're talking about neurodivergent individuals, we are, and I hate to use this term, but we're talking about a spectrum of traits. Mm-hmm. And each and every one of those individual groups, we band together because we recognize that all of us are doing the same thing. We're hiding who we are. We're masking who we are by suppressing our behaviors. We're trying to blend in. It's exhausting us. We're disassociating, we're burning out because of this constant monitoring of everything from your body language, the tone of your voice, how you word what you word, second and third guessing ourselves, And we don't even actually get any downtime, because as soon as your head hits the pillow, the inner voices start running if you were lucky enough to keep them quiet during the day. So there's never actually a recharge point.
Mm-hmm.
So, understanding all of that, I mean, I know I am getting much, much better personally at checking in with myself and monitoring and communicating with you and our children what I need. But do you see an improvement? Like, have you ever hit a burnout point from trying to fight for yourself so much, where you just didn't want to do it anymore and wanted to crawl under a rock?
Well, for the most part, with neurodivergence, from my experience, it's all about the relationship. Because the thing is that when you're talking to a person and you're reasoning with them, most people are generally pretty reasonable. Hey, can you not be so loud when you talk to me? Hey, can you not stand on my right side? Can you please stand over here when you talk to me? I'm deaf on this side. I just don't like people on this side. I just insert your reason for needing that person to be on this particular side of you. But most people, when you talk to them one-on-one and tell them that, in my experience, they're usually pretty accommodating. In my experience, the problem comes when you have essentially bureaucratic rules that are set in place, and the person has to balance being reasonable with you and dotting the I's and crossing the T's of following their job or following whatever their rule happens to be that they're trying to follow. Like with a boss. The boss might be, hey, I understand that issue, and I would totally love to set up like different work hours or something to finagle with you, but our business is 9 to 5. So in that particular aspect, the boss can't necessarily work with you because he's bound by a set of rules. Mm-hmm. Until we poke and poke and poke and get the bureaucracy to change their rules, the relationship is only going to help so much. But the relationship is where it starts. Talking to people, letting them know what your difficulty is, what your struggle is. At the same time, though, you've got to understand that there are some people that they don't care.
That's true. But yeah. I would even say that part of the reason that some people don't care is they've either never been exposed to it at all, or they've been overexposed to some form of advocacy that may or may not have rubbed them wrong. Mm-hmm. So where do you draw the line between advocacy and overexposing or oversharing?
I don't have an easy answer for that.
Okay. That means you have some idea.
It's the complicated relationship. It's the talking to people, letting them know where you are, what's going through your head. And some people are going to consider it oversharing, overexposing, but at the same time, a lot of us, we don't know where that line is. And there has not been enough discussion and whatnot for us to be able to understand where reasonable is. So all we can do at this point is go out, share, and when the person you're in front of goes, hey, that's too much, that's a no. Okay, that's too far. And really and truly, that's all we can do. Because until we've had these conversations enough to be able to go, okay, here's the rules, here's how things shake out, here's how they think. So now I can work within the way they think. Assuming you want to. Because there's some people that you will learn how they think and you'll decide, I don't want to be around that. That's not a thought process that I want in my bubble. And at that point, you have to go, okay, they're not my people. They need to go over there. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just that's the way they think. I don't want to think that way, so I'm not going to associate with that.
I mean, that moves into the next level of this is setting those boundaries. We've talked about recognizing what makes us uncomfortable. I have also advocated that to a certain extent, being a little uncomfortable is good for us, because as long as it's a good kind of uncomfortable, it promotes growth. So where do we set our personal boundaries, and how do we communicate that without oversharing?
That's the $64 million question.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head a second ago. And combined with my thought a moment ago, you just have to decide what feels comfortable.
Mm-hmm. But I feel like as humans, we need to seek out that uncomfortability. But at the same time, it needs to be on a personal basis. You don't need to have somebody telling you, hey, you need to go out and do this. Hey, you need to... No, you need to look and go, okay, this thing makes me uncomfortable. How much of this can I be okay with?
Right.
Because you've got some people that have an issue with big crowds. So telling them, okay, what we're going to do to treat you is you're going to go to the Super Bowl, and we're going to put you in a crowd of 100,000 people. No. You need to take a step back, and where are you comfortable at? Because essentially at the end of the day, all therapy is exposure therapy. Because if you're not exposed to something, you never have to deal with it. And that's how we grow as humans, as people, is you have to identify, okay, I'm here, I'm comfortable, I'm uncomfortable over there. Okay, well, take a half step in that direction and see how you feel. You're uncomfortable? Okay. Step back, wait a bit, and try again.
Okay, I think this is an important spot that I need to stipulate a couple of ground rules for this conversation that we're having. When I say I advocate for being a little uncomfortable, we need to acknowledge that almost every growth and mindset program that is out there tells you to be uncomfortable. That's where you grow from. But the point that we need to acknowledge here is that those programs are almost to a one designed for neurotypicals. So neurotypicals absolutely have to be a good bit uncomfortable to continue to grow. For neurodivergence, however, that uncomfortability starts to feel like we are fighting. It starts to drain us. So we have to be very, very aware of when is it time to disengage and stop the energy flow and go and recharge.
That's
because
why
it's a fault for a different mind.
That's why in my example I use the illustration of taking a step, because if you're the type person that large crowds frighten you, you don't want to go straight to like the Super Bowl. You want to go into a room with like two other people. Okay, mm-hmm. Are you okay there? Okay, awesome. We're going to bring in a third person. Are you still okay? Okay, how about a fourth? Okay, you're uncomfortable now? Okay, number 4 is going to leave now. We're comfortable here at 3, so we're going to stay here, and we're going to let ourselves be comfortable here, and then once we get good and comfortable, then we're going to begin again and see how far we can go. That's how you grow. And for me, I almost feel like this process, we have to apply it differently as neurodivergence, but it's the same process because it's the model that we're given in nature. The way the human body gets better is through being uncomfortable. You have to lift those heavy weights and actually destroy your muscle fibers for your body to rebuild it and to get stronger. And it's that way pretty much on every facet of your body. You have to run and take those big, huge, deep breaths that a runner has to do to increase that lung capacity. And all the different aspects of the body are that way. You have to train it. You have to get into a point that's slightly uncomfortable. Because I can't necessarily speak for anybody else, but I know for me, if I'm learning something that I don't know, it's uncomfortable. because this is information that I don't have. I feel stupid when I'm learning this because this is something I don't know. I'm ignorant on this topic.
And there are physical symptoms that is exactly what you're feeling. I call it the valley of the brow. You get this deep crease between your eyes where you squinch them together like you're angry at the computer monitor.
Right, but by being in that uncomfortability as much as I can be, that's how I grow. That's how I take the steps forward. That doesn't mean that everybody else should sit in front of a computer for 2, 3, 6 hours grinding and just like trying to force this into their head. For them, before they get to the hour mark, they might be ripping their hair out going, I can't do this.
Okay, but now we're talking about skills, not interpersonal relationships. So we do need to shift back just a little bit.
I don't necessarily see the difference, because
it is two different sets of skills, yes, but
well, my point is that the same facet that we use to grow physically, we can use to grow mentally and emotionally. It's that easing yourself into what you're uncomfortable with to be able to grow and do more than you did before. But you have to understand where your strength is. To try to emotionally step into a relationship that equivocally would need the emotional strength of lifting 500 pounds, and you only have the emotional strength of 100 pounds, you don't need to do that. But that takes a level of objectivity that you have to sit back and think about. And you have to evaluate yourself. Where are you comfortable? What is your strength?
I don't disagree, and I think this is a good spot to slip it in about that. When we're talking about asserting our needs, asserting what our strengths are, and things along that lines, this is about self-advocacy. We are not convincing people that this is what is happening. We are telling them that this is what we know. Can you work with it? And when we ask that question, as you said before, some people are not going to be receptive. They're going to say no. And as much as it sucks, we have to be okay with that and be ready to walk away.
Yeah. Because everyone has the right to say no, that they don't want to participate.
And at the same time, if those people say, yeah, we'll be supportive, and then everything that they do is invalidating that support, you have to be able to step away.
Or you have to be able to tell them, I know you want to support me, but what you're doing is not actually helping. But you have to tell them from a place of love. Everything has to be from an informative place, not an angry place. Because if you scream and holler at somebody, even if they have good intentions, you're going to turn off their good intentions.
Absolutely. So, I mean, okay. I guess that brings us into, I hate to call it this, self-advocacy in action, places that it becomes necessary. And what that looks like. So, okay, places where we have blah, 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 technical terms, I'm mumbling, my ADHD is catching up with me. The workplace is the first place that comes to mind. Those of us that do not have the pleasure of working for ourselves and have to go to a 9 to 5 or any other time block you may work in, as you mentioned before, asking for those accommodations, it should be simple, but it's not. And the reason that I say that is many workplaces aren't actually aware of the ADA requirements, the Americans with Disability Act requirements, because they're small business owners. They are not specialists in this stuff and maybe don't have an HR department that is a specialist in this stuff. You have to be prepared to educate people without, excuse the expression, without being an asshole.
Yeah, and at the same time, you got to educate yourself. Because
Absolutely.
If you don't know what your rights are under the ADA, you don't know what's going on.
So if you're in the U.S., let's make this really, really simple. The Americans with Disabilities Act says that essentially employers must provide accommodation unless it causes an undue hardship, like it makes it stupid. Like Jeremy mentioned before, the business is open from 9 to 6 and you want to work 6 to 12. Well, that just doesn't work. That you don't have to disclose your diagnosis, only a doctor backed up recommendation that you have these accommodations. And if your employer refuses, you can go the legal route or an advocacy organization, and oftentimes they have personnel that can help you resolve this without escalating it to lawsuit proportions. Now,
it is also a good point to note that neither of us are lawyers, or anything we say is to be considered legal advice.
I would absolutely say that these are notes that are taken. We are not lawyers. We are not counselors. Jeremy and I are just people that love to help, and please do your own independent research. So that brings me to the next place, and that's in school. A lot of our listeners are parent advocates. We're fighting for our kids. So when it comes to fighting for your kid, many of us have hit the wall where you have to have an actual medical diagnosis. But there's a reason behind that. The government has all kinds of amazing programs that are meant to make sure that our children don't, and I can't believe I'm going to use this phrase because it doesn't actually go with it, that our kids don't get left behind. Because that's a parent's nightmare, is that your kid is not where they're supposed to be. And so with a diagnosis, many school systems will have individualized education programs. That's the IEP. They'll have 504 plans. That's where your kid gets accommodations, but not necessarily specialized instruction. Or they'll have informal plans, which is you let a teacher or an administrator know about what your kid needs, and they'll do their best to help you. And these options are out there. Many administrators and teachers want you to be that involved without being a helicopter parent. I can say that firsthand. When my children were in the public school system, they much preferred me showing up to the meetings and sending correspondence to the teachers and asking questions, because it meant that we weren't fighting. We were in sync. We were in concert. We had reasonable expectations about what was my job, what they were going to help me with. And as long as you have helpful school staff, as long as you have passionate school staff, it's a blessing.
So what you're saying is, as long as you have a relationship, then it's great.
I mean, let's be real. Why are you going to look at the person that is helping you take care of your kid like they're an employee or your subject? No, they are helping educate and raise your child, even if you don't want to call it co-parenting.
True.
But again, this is about making sure that you know about the Disabilities Education Act, doing your homework, talking to a lawyer if you need to. You've got to keep up with documents. Like, for those of us that are ADHD parents, this can be a very real struggle. And as a practical tip, I recommend this for every single thing that we're talking about today. Keep a file folder with real pieces of paper in it. Because then you're not trolling through emails looking for things. You have it all at your fingertips. That is the thing that has been the most helpful for me as a parent advocating for my kids.
At the same time, though, we have to also keep in mind that there are some people that just
right.
That either from the tactile reason they don't like to touch paper, and so they keep everything digital. And there's those that are they are digital files, like they keep everything online in the cloud, and just that's where they're comfortable. For them, they should do the same thing, but figure out how to apply it to they essentially have to digitize all of that. But that's the thing, though, is that there's no one tool that's going to work, But if you find a tool, you can figure out how to apply it to your situation. That's why I'm all about giving out the tools, because we can tell them something to do. It's up to them to figure out how it works for them.
Right. And that's, in the last few minutes, we'll talk about a few additional tools and strategies. But this brings us to our most difficult part, the medical setting. Advocating for yourself in the medical profession. And I have found this extremely infuriating, and through no fault or design of their own, mind you. But you essentially have 3 segments of the medical staff, and in a generalized sort of way, they're broken up into age groups. You have young medical staff that are like under 30. They're up on all the new diagnostics. They know all of the new tests and symptoms. They know all of the new criteria. They are on it and ready to help you advocate for yourself and your kid. Then you have the people that are about our age, which is the 30s to 50s range, and they're the people that were going through school in the 90s and the early 2000s, and they are operating under what is often flawed information because they're not up to date on the newest diagnostic manual criteria. And then there's those that were trained before autism was even a diagnosis. And each group has very firm beliefs about what it means to be neurodivergent and how they should treat us, and no group treats us the same.
Yeah, because no group has the same understanding. Each group treats us by what they understand. So the old doctors are going to treat us based on the old standards. The new doctors are going to treat us based on the new standards.
Well, the important point I make with this is, as neurodivergents, we like things to be a certain way. We like to understand the pecking order. And one of the things that is very important that many people forget is you have 2 rights that many of us do not take advantage of. You have the right to bring an advocate with you, someone that will help you think straight, help you remember things, help explain things to you in a different way. They cannot block you from having that advocate. You also have the right to ask for a second opinion or another doctor. You are not locked in on who you are assigned. You always have options. And there are, as I said, multiple different thoughts and styles of thinking where our community is concerned. Usually a better option can be found. I know Jeremy and I, for years, I've helped him advocate for himself inside doctors' offices because the speed that they talk and fire things at him with, by the time he answers the current question, he's forgotten the 3 previous questions.
Generally.
And I know a lot of the women in the audience will understand this. Your husband comes home from the doctor's office. So, what did the doctor say? I'm healthy. Yeah, but what did he say? Give me details. Like, what was the conversation?
I think we talked about baseball.
And that's even worse in neurodivergent households. So I think just understanding that you have the right to bring a friend, and you have the right to ask for a second opinion, and you have the right to ask them to take you seriously are very important things. Yeah?
Yes. If we don't step up and try and stand up for ourselves, then we're going to wind up being in whatever box they decide to put us in. And that's kind of the problem that we've had for a while. Because you go back to the 80s, and it was ADHD, Asperger's, autism, and now they've moved forward, and now we have a better understanding where it's more just a single spectrum, where everybody has benefits and detriments at different places across that spectrum. And it's just us being able to talk about where we have our handicaps, where we have the places that we have our issues.
You got it. Keep going.
And so medically, no, it's gone.
It happens. And that's okay. It'll come back 20 minutes after we're off the air, and we can always put it in the forums. Because don't forget, for those of you that are listening, K-Fred forum community is a great place to interact with me and Jeremy, and with Stone and all of our amazing guests that we have on from week to week. There you go, Fred. There's your plug for the episode. Okay, so we're coming close to the top of the hour. I would like to recap very, very briefly what we've discussed so far. Ways that you can advocate for yourself to make it easier. Script those conversations beforehand. Bring somebody to support you. Use email or written formats if you need to avoid eye contact or the possible verbal pressure that can hit you. Set up realistic goals. Know what your goal is. Know what you're advocating for. And understand when you need to push and when it's time to walk away. So, coming up to the last little bit that Jeremy and I have planned. Jeremy, are there any personal tips or tricks that you have used to help advocate for yourself that might be interesting to the audience?
The main tools that I use would, I don't know, may or may not be considered, I think woohoo is the term that gets thrown around, but essentially it's breath work, just breathing. Because the faster you breathe, the faster the blood flows through your body, increasing your adrenaline and yada 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 exercise stuff. The more you slow down your breathing, the more you can slow your heart rate, the calmer you get, the slower everything gets in your mind. Because at the end of the day, your body is what controls your mind, and vice versa. Or, as Kara likes to say, I think it's meat sacks in hormone soup or something. I'm probably misquoting her, but that's the thing. We can, if by breathing, we can slow down, even if it's not, the breathing doesn't necessarily align with causing a physiological change of helping you in this. The fact that you are slowing down to take that breath, it will give you a chance to think. And so, for me, I've never really, I don't see problems where if you take time to think. Generally, things tend to work out a whole lot better when you take time to think rather than when you just take time to react.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, the breath work is important. I'm sure some people would probably talk about meditation helping as well, but for some neurodivergents, they may not have the ability to meditate. They may not just. We're all different. Some of us can, some of us can't, and most of us are in between, in the middle. And it doesn't matter what you're talking about.
That's true. And my final thoughts would be, we are a community. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. Some of us have neurotypical allies, some of us do not. Some of us have neurodivergent allies, and some of us do not. Regardless of the circumstances that you find yourself in, finding a community that will help lighten the load off of your shoulders, that understands your burdens, even if it's just from a place of love and not actual understanding, is imperative. Advocacy is not about being louder than others, regardless of the circumstances. It's about being clear, confident, and consistent in standing up for what you need. So regardless of what needs you may have or what situation you find yourself in, being clear, making sure that the words that you are using are the appropriate terminologies to the situation. Being confident implies, or it tells their animal brain that they need to take you seriously so that you don't become a threat. And being consistent proves that you are not going to budge from this that we need to find a common ground are going to better and further your cause faster than anything else that I know. Jeremy, last thoughts?
It is reasonable to have boundaries. It is reasonable to ask people to not get on your last nerve. It is reasonable that everybody not cause you to explode.
I think a better way to put that might be, and correct me if I'm wrong, it is reasonable to expect peace.
Accepted.
Okay, well, next week I hope that everyone is prepared to join us on another episode here on Sundays at 5 p.m. Hopefully we will have the amazing Stone back with us, and we will also be having the absolutely wonderful Kristen Williamson, and we will be talking about sensory overload. Ooh, that's a bit of a touchy topic, but I think that we're going to have an absolute blast with it. No, not sensory overload. Excuse me. Executive dysfunction is not laziness. There we go. See, I'm getting my topics crossed. So, executive dysfunction is not laziness. That's a bit of a hot button topic, and I think we're going to have an absolutely wonderful time. See you same place next week. Everybody have a wonderful and glorious week.
You got control of me, break my barricades, walls